Molly, why has tax got such a bad name? What is it?
I think over time people have just come to see tax as something they should be trying to avoid, rather than the contribution we should all make really to a comfortable and happy society. But I think there's something deeper than that, which is the fact that tax actually helps money circulate in our society. So if people avoid tax and if the government cuts tax, then actually there's no money going into the economy to pay for public services and also to stimulate the economy. So actually part of the reason we've got a recession now is because money's being taken out of the economy through public spending cuts, but also through reductions in taxation. So tax is really important because the circulation of money is important to keep the economy thriving.
So what about a campaign, tax is good?
Tax is good. Yeah, the joy of tax.
The joy of tax.
We should go, absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
This government has cut the number of tax collectors, and yet there's a figure I've seen that for every tax officer, the revenue actually collects £900,000. So it seems to me an absolute paradox that this government should be cutting HMRC at a time when it needs to increase its tax base.
The government says we're anxious to cut back on tax avoidance. That's the public position. Very senior revenue officials who we talk with say, oh, well, behind closed doors we're being told, be lax, be slack, don't push. These are not taxpayers, they're our customers. Keep them sweet. What an extraordinary culture to run. I'm sorry, I want our tax inspectors out there chasing red meat and nothing less, because it's our money they're supposed to be collecting. And the awful thing is that, as a result of this lax culture, well, 2.5% went up on VAT. That's going to hit the poorest households. Yeah. What's happening globally? This is the meta story. This is the really big injustice. Is that the tax burden over the last 30 years has increasingly been shifted from capital onto labour and onto consumers. The worst case that I'm aware of, which has been thoroughly investigated, and this was investigated by a team of tax specialists in Brazil, is the Brazilian case, where they rely very heavily upon consumption taxes, where the lowest 10% households by income pay 28% of their expenditure, their total expenditure, on tax. These are the people, the really impoverished people who are earning next to nothing. 28% of their household expenditure, which means income because they're not saving, goes on tax. Whereas the top decile pay just over 6.7% of their total earnings on tax. That's the direction we are all heading in. And that's why we have to fight this injustice. It might explain why the world has become a much less equal place during the course of my lifetime. This is why our agenda links up so closely with the spirit level agenda, which I hope you're familiar with. If you're not, read the spirit level.
I think people didn't want to underestimate how brave people like John, and particularly Richard, are. It's not just hard work, it's an amazing amount of courage to be able to take on the people that you do take on. So I think if we could look quite tactically at some of the ways in which we could attack where this great immorality, it's not a question of economics or politics or social arguments, it's just straight immorality. People need to be held to account. So if we could do things like that, and whoever is representing you at councils or at Parliament, then they should be called to account in terms of being prepared to stand up and fight alongside John and Richard, because now is the time, and it's about time all of us got behind them. Thanks for listening.
In 1990 I had half the England World Cup squad under investigation, and the reason that was possible was because these gentlemen don't often pay PAYE in the way in which most people in this room will. Most of them are actually employed as providing services to offshore firms, and large football clubs make payments to those offshore firms, and then the money stays offshore, and these guys never pay any tax. And it's very interesting listening to you about multinational organisations and firms and so on. But I think it's often something beneath the radar in this country, and I suppose that goes back to the spirit level stuff. That in the UK there is, and I've seen these people's tax files, and it's quite shocking when you see them, people with very, very substantial amounts of personal wealth. So you think about 20,000 people, high net worth individuals, who are beneath our radar and are actually who operate in much the same way that all the kind of international organisations you're talking about. And I think actually they're important to bring into the limelight as well, I think, because these people are not good citizens.
It seems to me that this is an example of the way we've let our financial system and the people who control it, the minority of people who control it, control us. Rather than using money as a tool, it seems to have taken over. And really it should be society, people and the environment to come first, and money should be a tool to improve our quality of life. To finish on a positive note, the other side, it seems to me, of the UK government, successive UK government's culpability in this, which is very clear from the talk, is that we as UK voters and citizens are actually the people who are in a position to change it.
Services, and today I was at Minchinhampton Library with one of these councillors who I described as having a backbone of a jellyfish, saying that there was no alternative but to close Minchinhampton Library. I wish we could have frog marched it down here, to be quite honest. When I read today that 1 in 5 young people are out of work, yet at the same time Stephen Hester, who is the chief executive at the Royal Bank of Scotland, which was bailed out for £1 billion of taxpayers' money and is owned 83% by the taxpayer, that he's expecting a bonus of £3 million to come his way. Now, what I think should have happened to banks like that is they should have been taken into public ownership. That we should have taken them, and they should have been then under democratic control, and they could have been used then for cheap loans for people, and in that way we could really start to tackle some of the problems. But we're being told that we have to pay for the crisis that's developed through the speculation, through the tax avoidance, which I understand a little bit more now, and which I'm pleased about, but of the financial crisis, which is also part of the bursting of the US housing bubble. And $1.7 trillion was used to bail out the bank.
It's auspicious that I come here tonight because this is the first time, literally the first time, I'm in a position to talk about a new book which has just been launched. I hope some of you who might read the Guardian newspaper will have heard of this book called Treasure Islands, which was launched officially last Thursday, but was serialised in the Guardian newspaper the previous weekend. Treasure Islands has been written by a journalist called Nicholas Jackson, who I recruited to my team in 2007, and Nick and I have been working non-stop, virtually every single day of the week, for about 2.5 hours a day. He and I have travelled the world researching this book and writing this book. He is a world-class journalist, Financial Times, The Economist, Reuters, and I promise you the book is a very, very good read. Although I didn't write it, it is my book. I just brought in a world-class journalist to make it as easy for you as possible. It's a bloody good read. You'll find yourself laughing and crying. You'll find yourself crawling up the wall with frustration and anger. But we must all learn the nature of the beast that we're up against.